So we're live from the crime scene. This is week 5 now. I can't believe we actually stuck to something beyond week 1. We're on 5. And we have new
It is
people every week.
April 17th, 2020.
April 17th, 2020, I believe day 33 of lockdown quarantine mode. Not that I'm keeping track every day.
Way to hit us with numbers.
So we've got a couple interesting discussions queued up for this week. Some show and tells. So Potter, why don't you kick us off? We've got an interesting 11D thing, even though I know we don't have direct experience with 11D, but now apparently you do.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. So let me switch over here. Let me actually hide my video too, just in case. Oh, shoot, now I lost all my Zoom stuff. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right. So 11D. 11D is like Jekyll. It's a static site generator. Basically run one command and it figures out what file formats you have and converts it into a website here. So you can create a whole website with just markdown files, run this 11D command, and it'll output a site. It's pretty cool. I'm really, we're really into static site generators. We just went, full bore and have been using HAX CMS for all of our static sites, which is a website that's completely runs on web components. But in this case, for that Bones app that I've been working on and I've been showing in some past videos, our 3D artist has been going through and for every bone asset, he's been creating an index.html file. So what he gave me was a whole folder of index.html files. So using 11D, I was able to create that into a usable static site with just one command, which is pretty awesome. So 11D goes through, finds all of the index.html files, and then outputs them into a directory that looks, a file structure that looks very similar than what I gave it. But what it allows you to do is add layouts to it. So I can create a default layout for all of these index.html files that looks something like this. And I can start converting my index.html files to something like this, where I'm still using HTML, but I can add some head matter into it to give it dynamic properties. So it's pretty cool. It's probably the easiest static site generator I've ever seen, which is why a lot of people like it. So now web components. So this is a good example of what the typical developer would run into whenever they think about, okay, well, how do I add some web components to it? And I'm trying to think of what's the absolute easiest approach to this. I mean, we could get into all of the build routines and everything to hook something like that up, but what is just the easiest thing to get started? Well, what we could do is we could go into here and I'm going to add a script for, let's see here. Oh, did I blow that away? I'm going to add a script, type module. And I have under the assets, JS, app.js. Okay. All right, so I think that is now in there. Let's go to assets. Okay. So I'm gonna console log that out. Just say hi there, just to make sure that we had this all set up correctly. Okay. So instead of going through the whole build process, it would be amazing if I could just start importing files. So something like this, to where this is your typical web component. And you can see that I'm pulling in dependencies. But instead of pulling them in from a node modules directory, I'm actually referencing them from the CDN. So I'm pulling in lit element, I'm pulling in mobx for state management, and I'm creating a web component on the fly without any build step. Now this, there was a build step, obviously. So what we do is we have a list of all of our components, or all of our web components, and we do run a build that turns them into an ES6 bundle, and we put them on a CDN. And what that would allow you to do is just basically copy and paste these references. And I can now start adding those to my static site. So if I say, what's this called? HAX CMS Bones theme. Okay, let's see. So I should see HAX CMS Bones theme. And if I refresh, voila, there we go. So that is just, that is an incredible workflow. No build step, no nothing. We're just referencing dependencies straight from the CDN. If you remember back in the jQuery plugin days and how amazing that was, we're back there. We can all celebrate.
You're back there. I mean, that's a lot of people also use Pika. Pika's trying to push a vision of local development like that too, except Pika's resolves and compiles on the fly, which is pretty sick.
Yes. And they have the Pika CDN that does that on the fly. They also have the Snowpack, which is a sort of a middle ground between the full build step and it like installs the modules locally, and you reference them using not bear, but what's it called? Not bear imports, but
oh, you use like
dot
web
slash. Yeah.
Yeah, you use like web modules, resolved imports. And for, because we have certainly a mix of skill sets tuning in here as far as front end dev, when you're referring to compiled or built assets, the thing that Mike is showing right now, this code will work on roughly 90% of browsing traffic, just because of where web standards are. But there's certain conventions that I'm sure Mike even used in his little example, like fat arrow, that is not supported in all, editions of JavaScript for all time. So yeah, right there with the auto run. So the reason you run build routines or have to compile things in part is so that it helps resolve those conventions from niceties for us to use into things that vast majority of browsers can accept.
Right. So, so this is really cool. I really like that workflow. Now, Brian sent me that magic importer.
Oh my
and he
God.
said, "Here, try
use
this."
the magic.
Yeah, so we're gonna try the magic importer, which is just, it's killer. So what we're gonna do is, and Brian did a deep dive on this in previous episodes, but what this does is it loads the off of our CDN. It loads this build script, which starts to does it preload anything right off the bat, or does it set up listeners for undefined components?
So what the build, I mean, you can go to the build file. You can, if you care to, but it's effectively figuring out it's feature detecting what version to send you. And then it's going to load up right there as wc-registry.json. And that is now part of our build routine, that it figures out what web components there are amongst the files it's compiling, and then creates this big object. So I say big object, but ultimately compressed, it's less than 1K, I think, which then it does a document.query selector all, and it just hits star at the moment and looks for anything that it finds in that has a hyphen. Then after the hyphen, it looks and sees what isn't defined, and then if it matches that object, it automatically imports it. So this is effectively a universal way of shipping web components into anything in a relatively performant way. I should probably dig up the tweet thread that I had with a guy from Google, because he was analyzing it, I think a little bit kind of like, what the heck is this? but yeah, so that's effectively what it's doing. You have access to any tag as you type it. So the fact that rcoder shows up in there, if you type rcoder, it'll work in this, and it'll only import the things required for rcoder.
Yep. And the way that rcoder works is it injects this VS Code tag into the DOM, and then it expects to be given an endpoint, and the endpoint would actually be able to compile this on the fly. So the process button right now is grayed out because it doesn't have access to a running microservice. But that's as easy as it could be to add that little R code functionality to your site. Now, so taking it one step beyond that, as I said, that we use HAX CMS for most of our static sites, but you can actually use HAX CMS elements, which are all web components, inside of another CMS. So sounds confusing, but what I have here is an 11D function. So 11D allows you to tie into its runtime. And what I've done is I've collected all of the files that 11D identified, and I've outputted a site.json file. And what a site.json file in HAX CMS land is, it's basically defining the entire navigation and all of the site information. So that HAX CMS, as soon as it loads, it looks for a site.json file so that it can start scaffolding out like its router and start hooking up all of its state management.
Did you get working what I think you got working?
We'll see. I haven't really tested this, so I'm kind of fingers crossed here. But if we look inside our site, which 11D outputs the built site in this _site directory. So we now have a site.json. Oops.
I have a question. So when you do your build site, is this like a general that everyone can use, or do you have things built in there for just say what you guys use in your departments?
In terms of web components?
Like you say your build file, you run the build file and it pulls in all of the
so it's totally general.
Okay, so it's not like you guys, my unit uses this, so we're only gonna do these. It's just literally everything.
Yeah, it gets we'll keep showing pieces of the CDN part. I think you're thinking of the CDN part. So we run a routine that
I think so, yes.
Yeah, that throws a ton of stuff up on that CDN. So let's say that we worked on like a PSU logo tag that everybody could use. We would put that into our our scripts to basically start building that, and then it would be available on the CDN with everything else. But the idea, we have this huge bucket of all available possible combinations. Everybody integrates the exact same way, and then we can have, you know, discussions via this or other channels to come up with new tags that we want as a university to be shipped. But the approach is entirely generic. National Archives is starting to move towards this as well, because they have a ton of properties. They don't entirely know what they're putting in the site, and they're not building applications. They're augmenting properties the way that I know that you do a lot of times, as far as like, hey, I have this theme that happens to be in WordPress, or in Drupal or whatever. So yeah, we're trying to build towards a much more augment existing properties and then throw whatever we want on there. But there is currently still just kind of like a people ask me and then I make it available workflow at the moment.
Yeah, because like Joe built us, and that we're using build scripts, but it's definitely geared towards the things that we need and not what other people need. So I just didn't know if this was general or just your needs. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. But thank you.
Yeah, the idea is that this would definitely be general and repurposable to where you could, it would be a template for you to possibly create your own if you needed to. So that way, like, you could just have a CDN for you that maybe leverages, you know, a base CDN or something like that, or a base library like the PSU library, but you have curated your own CDN. That's a possibility too. But this, in this example, what you could do is, let's say that you're sick of doing, you know, spinning up WordPress sites over and over and over again and starting from scratch over again. What you could do here is we've now converted this this 11D static site into a HAX CMS capable site. So where if you take a look at all these site dash tags, those are all HAX CMS tags. And what they are is they have the state management wired into them. So we should be able to do something like this where I say, oh, I want a site title. And let's see here. Oh no, what'd I do? Oh, that's right. I need to actually hook up HAX CMS. All right. So this is how you get a HAX CMS site running. You basically point the HAX CMS site builder at the site.json file that we generated. And now we have this magic tag that we just put site title on there, and it's outputting this. Now it's outputting that from, let me see, from this information, probably, yeah, right here. So if we say Bones app, and we refresh, we now get Bones app, and it's clickable and everything. Now that's kind of just a basic example, but we could also do something where we use the site menu. So in HAX CMS, you can just type site menu and you get a full site hierarchy menu. Now it's not styled or anything, but these are all the pages that were found in 11D.
And it just doesn't have a title.
It just doesn't have a title.
Gotcha.
So let's say that we want to add a title. Now this is where the magic of 11D comes in, is that the structure is totally derived from the file system. And what that means is that you can add what's called head matter. So I can say title, and this is called Atlas. If I refresh, you'll now see Atlas there. So that's sort of an example of smushing two different magical static site generators together to create something really interesting. So you have the 11D that's just managing all the static files off the file system, and it's preparing, it's putting all that information together in a format where your web components can now react to it. So you could imagine this is how you might get past having a site that is pre-rendered, is server-side rendered, and it contains a bunch of HAX CMS or just web components built into it that whenever they are rendered to the page, they go to something like site.json and sort of I'll take over from here, single page application style. But anyhow, yeah, that is a pretty cool little funky script there.
Yeah, you got it working already.
Yeah.
I can't believe you like, that's ridiculous. I mean, and if you threw in the site.json as it got built, if you threw one of the valid themes, then suddenly this would start to look like a real website.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you threw in the learn to schema, which is rather mundane.
So would that make it easy for, say, Collins and myself to do some quick and dirty theming?
Maybe. Yeah, it might.
Interesting.
Yeah, look at that. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's really not that much that you have to add into it. If you did, and it's just there anyway. Yeah. So if you click the pages, does the content render in the middle?
No, because I think my base tag is messed up there. Site.
Oh, I see. Yeah. But that's pretty minimal.
Yeah. That is pretty cool. What's another theme?
The if you do HAX or -11.
What?
HAXOR -sleven, SLEVI. Yeah.
Oh, that's not a page.
Yeah, that path's not a thing. Maybe you spelled it wrong because it's insane.
SLE.
It's what my blog uses. Let me see.
Okay.
HAX Slevin, SLEVIN.
HAX or?
Yeah, HAX or Slevin. I don't understand. Why is this so hard? HAX or Slevin, yeah. That's what I have.
Maybe it just doesn't have the theme elements
it
on
might
it.
not. Yeah, the homepage. The homepage for that one is
okay.
Yeah, I might not load that one.
Gotcha. But yeah, that's very interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
I will report back because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that might be an interesting way of handling our publishing routine currently, or an aspect of our publishing routine, because I know Andrew ran into a ton of confusion around how to build custom stuff into a site. I know Chuck did previously because we're, making these conventions up as we go, basically. And Colin, one of my students, he also ran into that today of like, hey, where do I run yarn start from? Oh, do it from your site. Oh, where do I run yarn install from? Oh, it's somewhere else. That's completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that could be an interesting middle ground. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Andrew, you have any interest in showing whatever it is I just referenced? I don't even know what that could be.
I will actually unmute
There's
myself.
a lot of traffic behind you, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Careful.
traffic.
Yeah,
I'll
don't
be
let-
careful. I'm sitting in the center divide. All right. So just a quick little bit of background. So this is a project that I've been working on. I showed a little bit of it a couple weeks ago. It is a project called Beaumont and Fletcher that they need the ability to take TEI XML documents that are created based upon the information that was presented in this project. The Penn State University libraries went through and digitized this manuscript from, I think it's 1680 or 1690, and there are two different, an undergraduate class and a graduate class, that are converting the text from this digitized resource into a TEI XML document. And then there is going to be, there is already a class that is analyzing this information as images and put into PDFs. And they said, well, maybe there's some way that we can make that into like HTML documents or something, you know, put it on a website. And so that's where that the project came from. So we have gone through and created this TEI render element that what it does is takes the TEI XML and converts it into HTML. And then what I've been working on in the last week, 2 weeks, has been trying to get it moved from just presenting the HTML to it actually doing something with it that's a little bit more interesting. So Nikki was really helpful in helping me to get a bunch of different copy links. So this is the element as it stands right now. So you can see as I mouse over each one of the different lines, she helped me to get those link tags in there, so that when you click on it, it pops up this little toast, and then you have the ability to paste in that particular URL, which the professor was super excited about, because that means that now she can actually grab those URLs and put those into her core syllabus and so on and so forth, so that people can hop right into the particular thing that they're supposed to be discussing. So one of the other things that I added in this week, in addition to making it so that instead of it appearing on every line, then it just appears when you mouse over, I also added in this ability for you to see the actual line numbers, which one of the fun things about that is that I changed it so that there's a line display property, so that I can change it to 10 lines, for example. And instead of then showing on every single line, then it shows every 10th line the text for the line number. So that's kind of fun. And let's see what else. Brian also helped me to reorder the toast a little bit, so that it was only being used once instead of it being on every single element, which was neat. And let's see. Oh, and then this is actually, so the element itself, but then we have some of these other different style elements. So this is a turn under, so it's an attribute on the XML. As you look at the XML, then you have some of these render turn over, and there's a turn under and an indent and a couple of other different funny little attributes that are on there. And so this is a turn over, where it's actually taking that and changing the styling based upon those different attributes in the XML. But then finally, this is actually it being presented inside of HAX CMS. So I have the different acts that are available in introduction, and the nice pagination that you have going back and forth. There's an element in there as well for being able to pop out to the actual page, so you can see the actual page that you're looking at right here. This is the rendered version, and this is the actual original manuscript. So kind of bridges both those different worlds. So that's what I've got. A couple different elements on the progress on that element marching forward. So
That is so cool, Andrew. That looks really good.
thanks, Mike.
Agreed. This looks really cool.
Yeah, now we just need to get this in front of our folks in arts and architecture, because I'm sure they have plays that they've never even thought of, doing this. We have courses that have this type of information, and we've, never. Anytime I see it, it's just, hey, throw a PDF up, which is fine if you had no other option, but especially if you get some of the search index aspects of this working, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, this is neat. Yeah, the links that we're using, it's just basically leveraging the anchor behaviors element that I made that's looking for different IDs within Shadow DOM.
Yeah, are you able to pull up that part of the code, Andrew? Because I've been curious how one integrates that for other purposes, but Nikki has 10 million other elements that I always have to learn how to integrate. So
I believe anchor behaviors is just a single line. Like you import it and then it does its thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where we have the different lines. And based upon it having those lines, then it's going to go through and attach the paper icon button to each one of the different things and identify the event listener for the click.
but what makes it actually render there? So this part renders it there? Oh, you're saying you put in the relative headings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Nikki? Oh, my bad. I was thinking the absolute. I thought you used the absolute positioning behavior. Okay, never mind.
No, it's the anchor behaviors. Yeah, after a while, all the little behaviors I made just sort of run together in my head.
I know. You can tell it's the end of a long week.
Yeah. So.
Could you show the toast thing real quick?
The actual activity of it, or the code behind it?
The code.
Okay. So we're using the simple toast, which is inside of the LRN web components. That I believe, Brian, you were saying Nikki did that, right?
Brian, I thought you made simple toast.
Yeah, I can't remember if I made that or she did.
Okay.
I can look that up offline.
Either that or somebody's actually contributing anonymously and we just don't know it.
It's one of us somewhere.
So it's based upon the idea that the paper toast, but it has a couple of different things simplified. And my understanding is that it kind of generalizes things so that you can have a single simple toast that's there and then reference that and call it. So let's see.
Like, where does the simple toast element get added to on the page?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking here for.
It's in the constructor.
Yeah, here we go. So inside of the, as Brian
I mean, in
said,
terms of the DOM structure.
It registers itself to or whatever in the constructor, whenever it gets set up, it appends itself to the bottom of the window, right, Ryan?
Yeah. So the request availability, everyone that wants to access the toast calls request availability, which is how Andrew's demo of this by itself works exactly the same as if it's in HAX CMS. So anything that we make that wants to use a toast does a request availability call in its constructor or some point in the operation, which either returns the singleton, a reference to the singleton, or it appends it to the DOM at that point at the highest level of the document. Because the issue that that Andrew was running into was made a paper toast, and when it was by itself, that worked fine. But then when it was the element put inside of HAX CMS, it would render somewhere down, deeper in a shadow root. And so it wasn't able to get Z index high enough, which is a super common issue with these types of modals and dialogues and things. So then the way that you access the singleton is via events.
When that toast comes up, does it also give an assertive ARIA thing? I forget what the term for it is. But in accessibility, when there's something that changes and it like interrupts the screen reader.
At the moment, it uses paper toast, so I'm pretty sure that that's baked into paper toast.
Cool.
But the other nice thing of part of why we structured it towards the singleton is if we do have an alley issue like that, or there can be an enhancement, we got a single point to go back and fix.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm still new to some of the terms that we were using, and I didn't know how to describe exactly.
Oh, it's really cool. This is awesome.
It's also the fun of using someone else's elements. You don't need to understand as much of the magic if it, if it just worked.
Yeah, I'm starting to understand the working part, but how it actually works is definitely, there's a lot. So, all right, I think that's all I have.
Cool. All right, let me queue up my demo here. Make sure I have it in this other tab. All right. So, I wanted to do a deep dive of like code. I'm glad Andrew and Potter did get into code. Some of these we end up like saying, hey, look at this neat thing I made, and then not really digging into the depths of some of the syntax and stuff. But as usual, this is like manifesto level, as everyone was making fun of me ahead of time. It's pretty much that's what all of my projects are anymore, it seems. But this is a biggie for me personally, but what I don't even know what to call this thing. So before I go into the code, I'll just show you what it's doing. So earlier this week, and this code pen, I've referenced it before, I throw it in the chat for people to play with so they can see what's going on. This code pen is leveraging our Penn State CDN that we've set up. And part of our build routine generates, as Mike pointed to, this WC registry.json. So what's so important about this beyond like you just drop it in, it integrates. So for example, this is a copy of Elmza Learning Network that's running in liberal arts. If I go and view source, it's got that same one, 2-line drop in the script, say the CDN, point to the build.js file. And this build.js file is identical no matter where it goes. So we have the same integration methodology everywhere now.
So if Cindy would want to use some of our stuff today, she could do it with those 2 lines.
She could literally go to the code pen, which I now closed apparently, go to the code pen and hit settings and HTML, and this chunk here will work on any website anywhere that it's dropped into. No build routines, no nothing. And
then she could use the accordions, the video player, everything her heart desires.
Yes. So I like how you're leading questions here. So if I did,
that's what I'm here for. I'm the plan.
If I knew that an alley collapse existed, I could make an alley collapse, and I believe it's div slot equals header or heading. It's heading, demo div, and then we would close that alley collapse. And now magically we have a demo alley collapse. If we wanted to put content inside of it,
we'd need a div slot equals content.
No, you don't even have to do that. It's just whatever's inside of it.
Oh yeah.
I think you made. I think you allowed it to do both.
Oh yeah, I did. And then if you wrapped a couple of those inside an alley collapse group, and then gave it the radio attribute, I believe that's the one that turns it into accordion behavior.
So if I did that, alley collapse group, right, and then go to top of it. Alley collapse group, radio, accordion. All right, and then if I open this one, no, I don't think that actually works the way that you have documented that it does, but
it should work the way it does. I'm just looking why. I'll have to look at why it's not working.
maybe I have something.
Yeah, because even looking at the styling in your group, something's not right. But at any rate,
Let's go all the way to the top. Let's see if that helps. Radio. All right.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Yep.
So I had it in the wrong place before. So now I've got an alley collapse group. The huge deal for implementation, right, is I didn't import alley collapse group. It just knows how to get it. So I think this is game changing for content management system integration, for some of the stuff like Potter threw together that example rather rapidly because of what this is able to achieve, and still hits relatively high performance marks. I threw a thread in the chat of Alex critiquing large aspects of it, which I'll go and implement the performance improvements in. But so the big deal for this week is 3 weeks ago on these, came up with this idea, tested it. Now we have it in production everywhere because it's vastly superior to what we were doing. So for example, my HAX CMS course sites, now when I go to one of them, this is using the CDN and the integration is identical, right? So it hits a build and you see it's the exact same file. So it dramatically simplifies the way that we can roll stuff out and the scope to it. Plus, if you've gone to my course site and then you go to like an Elms Learning Network course, you're leveraging the same CDN. So we're going to start to see network effects as far as those unbundled assets being leveraged over and over again across multiple properties. So anyone, anywhere that hits this website will then be seeding the cache for the LRN-sys button tag. Then theoretically anywhere else they go in the universe that would have that, which is what this site has, would also have it. Part of what Alex told me is this initial.
So you're saying if we had a Penn State-wide CDN, then they could be caching assets university-wide and not have to reload them on everybody's different systems.
We could, but you implied that we don't currently. So we already have one. So those assets sit out on CloudFront. Every time we update our build routines, there's a job that rolls through and updates the CloudFront instance. So Alex gave me some tips on how to make this perform even better. You see that initial flash of unstyled content, which is related to where the entry point's coming from. But so we've got this, if we have the ability to start building applications without knowing necessarily what's in them, we need to figure out what's in them. So for what the interface is that I'm trying to replace, we fire up one of our Drupal sites and we go to the HAX blocks editor, you get this just hellish UI that's like, hey, put in your YouTube key and somehow manage this elements auto load list and know what it is. So this has been the biggest area where we just lose people. They have no idea what this is for. But what it does is this is configuring the HAX editor for whatever that platform is. So there's a very similar display in every single system that implements HAX. And I'm opening this so you can watch the XHR. So when I go to edit this page in HAX mode, and HAX loads up, you can see an XHR, one that goes out the door to the WC registry, right? So it starts to know what to unpack. And the other goes to this. So this is what we call the app store in HAX. It's basically the rules of the road. So the fact that HAX can use a video player is because this little definition showed up and said, hey, there's a video player. Now, we need a way for people to be able to manage that without thinking. So I don't know what to call this. It actually started in a repo called product card for some reason. I don't know why I picked that name because that makes no sense whatsoever. But so here's what's going on with this little area. I can pick the CDN that I want to use. So if I pick Penn State, that is going to go and request the wc-registry.json file. Then it's going to build out this searchable visual index of everything that is supporting HAX that it just discovered on the fly. So I can say, make that 4 columns. Let's look for things that are a video player. I can then dig into the details, and this is reading off metadata that's in those HAX properties for the element. And now we have support for demos. So I can pop open this demo and be like, oh, that's a small space, which was feedback Tom had. Let's open that up in one of our singleton modals. So I can look at that and be like, yeah, that's the tag I want. Let's enable that. And so that way end users can use it. Now, if I disable it, we've got a nice little gray out effect visually. And I can go through and disable these or re-enable them. I can just find the education-centric things based on the tags underneath. Look at the demo stop note. It supports multiple demos. So if I want to see what the warning version is versus the hold up there, it also provides a snippet that says, hey, if you copy and paste this, you'll get exactly this thing. So it's kind of becoming this mega dashboard of just like seeing what's on the CDN. This is more or less visualizing what's on the CDN. And because I don't have to think about what the build routine is anymore, I can just start throwing other tags on the interface and letting people know how to use them. This, I could filter by just the things that have demos, right? And say, well, I really want to use the things that have demos, some state management issue there. I've started to add the demos in for these, started to work on, I need to make this be visual, but the ability to add templates and layouts through a UI, all the YouTube keys and that stuff is in its own tab. And then this data is being built automatically. I don't really know what to do with this yet. So part of this is like, tell me what to do with this. But this group, this read off wc-registry.json and formed 2 groups on the fly. The first group is any tag that can be used in HAX. So you end up seeing that here with this mega list. If I get rid of that and scroll, like we're getting a lot of tags that are HAX capable. But those are ones that were found on the fly, and then their HAX schema was read in. I didn't like store this anywhere. So those get read out, and we'll see we have 75 tags currently. The other bucket is, these are all the potential definitions it found. So we have a couple web components that we either use or have in build routines for potential use among the dozens of apps that we're working on.
This is why I'm convinced that maybe we have secret contributors that we don't know about, because components show up and I don't remember who the heck did them. And notice I said heck there.
Well done, Nikki. Well done.
How is it that we have that many HAX capable components?
Some of us don't sleep.
Yeah. Darn you for sleeping, Potter.
I mean, we've got a lot of things that we've never used that actually have HAX schema in them. So like relative heading, we don't use. The list, the other thing that this will open up is there's a ton of elements that Nikki or I have made, and then I just forget to put in the demo schema that's on haxaweb.org. And so then no one knows it actually has HAX schema. So yeah, we have 75. I mean, it's everything from like the HAX logo to technically Nikki's HAX text editor has HAX schema in it. Some of these I don't think are valid because they just have the function.
They're just works in progress.
Yeah, they're works in progress. So we do have to go clean up some of them, obviously. But then the last tab is help, which, stealing ideas from Aiden's cool go and hit the little database off of Google Docs file elsewhere idea. that tab is rendering an MD-block tag, and the MD-block tag, I'll refresh and you can see it in the network, do XHR, hits this markdown file living on GitHub in the HAX CMS repo. So if we had people contribute to an update and like improve the like how to get started with HAX or anything in our universe, it's the idea is that this tag gets dropped into any CMS, whether it's Drupal, Backdrop, WordPress, HAX CMS even, I'll start wiring this in there. And that those tutorial directions or whatever else just is updated. So it's always fresh. Then in the debug area here, the idea is, you know, I go and I update these. I go and let's disable some of these. And then in the debug area, visualizing what's going on, I could hit get app store values. And it is actually going to take all of that information that was in the page and more or less generate valid app store schema that could be used by HAX in any system. So because that wc-registry.json file is read in on the fly, this starts to become something that anyone can build their assets that they've worked on, and it discovers the things that are HAX capable and then gives them a UI to actually stitch it together. So looking at, oh, of course I closed my window. Of course, I had the code open to the exact place that I wanted to go to it. But looking at some of what's going on here, we can lead into like discussion of lit versus lit HTML, lit element, etc. So our demo, yeah. So our demo only has a HAX element list selector element name. You can see these are getting really verbose. I have literally no idea what to call these things. But the rest of the script that's in the demo is just to populate that little accordion area. So that's not even required. It should be able to just work with just the tag is the hope. So using that as an entryway, I'd say the first hiccup in like, hey, we can just use lit element or vanilla even, is we have a lot of icons that ultimately boil down to using the Iron Icons libraries. Now, we can come up with ways off of that at some point, but in that regard, we're more or less tied to those icon sets until we, I mean, I really like the way those icon sets get integrated and lazy discovered. So it's not that we can't replace it. We'll have to for sure. But the nice thing with building applications anymore is, so like if I refresh and go here, even things down to that, right? This simple little like hexagon loader, we solved that once. Now we just pull in our hexagon loader and say, you know, hey, it has loading reflected, so let's position it absolutely when it's rendering. And then down on the page, I mean, with syntax, it looks somewhat like this. So for starters, as far as what we're looking at with lit element, or actually, I guess this is lit HTML syntax, but lit element, you're going to have a render callback, and then you're going to return this HTML function. So if you're not familiar with the backticks, that's allows you to use what's called template literal syntax. So then you can write stuff like this, basically referencing variables in the HTML. Lit HTML provides this convention, which is effectively apply an event listener to this element. And when you see response bubble up, then run this function. That's a nice convention. I for a while drug my feet about actually implementing it that way because
He did, but I embraced it fully. I love that convention.
She did, and I don't think it's gonna hurt us. I don't know. Lit element is so small that I really don't see a ton of reason, and lit HTML is even smaller, but I really don't see a reason to get off lit HTML as far as what it's providing, with the hope that the the native web platform should start to take over some of these things. I mean, the Polymer less than version 1 was like 50 or 60K, and then like Polymer 1 to 2, it dropped to about 40K, I think, and then Polymer 3 was like 28K. And the reason they were able to do that is they just kept removing stuff as the web caught up. So they've kind of at least had a history of doing that. So I'm hoping as some of this stuff pops up in the native web platform, you'll see lit element get even smaller. This is a convention I'm starting to use more of. So this is a conditional, and basically saying if show card list is true, which you can trace as to how that's changing. So show card list is true if we get it, this function is called, which is active tab changed, which has to listen on the window, and we do window listeners in our constructor here. So when you see active tab changed, then call this event. And when we call the event, we're going to look and see if the active tab is named HAX core search. Now, some of this is a little bit of like magic within the weeds of the projects we work on, but every time you click one of these, it's emitting an event from Nikki's Ali Tabs project as to what is currently active. So even though this list technically isn't in this tab, I know when that tab is active, and then when it's active, I tell that to re-render. Now you may notice, and it's hard to tell with the, you can probably see it, right? You can see that there's a delay there. Now that is because I'm not just hiding these things when they're not in use. I'm actually removing them from the DOM and re-rendering them. So every time that tab is clicked to, this is what the conditional rendering ends up netting you. Where is it? Oh, it's this card list. Okay, so now if I go to this other tab, it's just gone. See, and you'll see there's nothing there. Now if I go back to this, hey, it shows up, and even the hexagon loader showed up. So balancing, performance types of stuff in that way, I could have done this. I could take this out, take that out, and instead done hidden equals, and so hide this when show card list is true, or actually it's false. And what the question mark does is it says apply a Boolean evaluation. So it should, I would say, it should have better performance between these now, because it's not actually removing this from the page and re-adding it. It's just showing it. It's toggling the hidden state, basically.
What's the benefit of removing it?
Sorry, go ahead.
I've found, particularly in some of our larger applications, like Elm's Learning Network directly, when you start hitting this level with what this is doing, like you see that rather drag on the initial paint, but that's because of when we built this. This is a Polymer app. However, in our studio that I can't go to the interfaces for privacy reasons, having a DOM that has 10,000 different elements is not unheard of. And so if we can conditionally render even pieces of that to ensure that it's not going to fall down when it's thrown into a larger system, yeah, that's the main thing. If you just hide it, it still technically is in the DOM tree. So any particularly with these legacy apps, is the way I'm referring to CMS monoliths now. But as far as with these legacy applications, you don't know the structure of what's there. So then when I throw this into an unknown structure, I probably want to make sure I'm cleaning up as much as possible. You never know when there's some jQuery selectors or something that's going to do an aggressive, like select the whole DOM, or get element coordinates, get an XY position or scroll position type of a thing.
So Brian, if I understand correctly, one of the benefits of lit element is that, well, actually just of lit at HTML, I suppose, is that it is doing a more controlled refresh. So like with logic like this in your template, it's only changing the data that you've updated here rather than repainting the whole thing. Is that more performant in your experience? Like, have you really, is that significant? Or something like this, I mean, you're still seeing the delay.
I'm seeing a delay with this one specifically only because of how aggressive this element is. So HAX element card list runs a map function. And so you can, this is another nice lit HTML convention, is you can do, in this case, this is an array. So you can do an array map in context, and then it's basically looping through the items and printing everything it finds while updating data binding, setting the slots dynamically, which is a pretty aggressive usage of this, really. Like when I hit 5 columns, that happens pretty darn fast, which is, I'm actually pretty surprised it does that, because of the way Nikki's grid plate works. You envision that this is like slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4. Whenever you change what the columns are, I recalculate which slot these things should be in so that they actually show up there. So this is happening pretty quickly, but if I scroll, I mean, we've got, you know, as I pointed to before, like 74 complex interactions here that have nesting. And so I think that drag on the UI is mostly because of how sophisticated this one element is. But yeah, you're right, Cassandra. It's leveraging some internal logic to how template literal syntax works itself to literally only update where the template literal is.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that lit element is the only one that does that, I think.
You mean lit HTML?
Yeah, lit HTML. Everyone else just does the full virtual DOM, throw it away and put in the new one.
Hyper HTML works extremely similarly, and I know there were some back and forth about who invented what first kind of a thing. But everybody else uses a virtual DOM, which the virtual DOM is then in this one instance, to my understanding again, is going to be when I click to here, it's going to have done some processing behind the scenes and then inject the whole DOM structure. So you might not get this, you know, tap and you've got a delay in the ripple there type of a thing. Also, for whatever reason, ripple effects are incredibly performance laggy, just in general across the web. So I would use them more sparingly than we have. But
part of that is that we're still using paper button until we make a replacement.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
So
and I actually,
that's gone.
This is the first little app that I've been building that uses MWC elements. So like this is a MWC button, which is supposed to be a lit element implementation that is one-to-one correct with material UI. So you see it with that thing. Where else am I using? I'm using it somewhere else in here.
Nikki, we have a button. You can use our button.
Oh, I'll use your button.
Kyle just did some really badass stuff with the button. Actually, we have a call to action, which looks like a button, and then Kyle's just working on PFE button, which is got a button in the light DOM, which is hidden from the UI, but informs the shadow DOM. Just really cool.
Nice. I think I want this button. Maybe that's what we do, because I've replaced a lot of the paper inputs with our simple fields inputs, but I didn't replace paper button because it's just too much of a pain, and I wanted to move on to other things.
And when I mentioned forms, that like some of this is just gluing stuff together. So Nikki's simple fields form element takes into account a endpoint that you're going to feed it JSON from. And so that happens very early on in the transaction. Like you can't even tell, it loads so fast for the most part. But fields.json is serving up HAX schema. So we had to write HAX schema for the HAX to work, right? So it's basically the bridge between this generating a field in HAX. So now we're able to generate headless forms for anything out of this. So if we just pass HAX schema into Nikki's simple fields element, simple fields form element, it generates this entire thing. So,
and it'll take the standard JSON schema as well. It will take either and just detect which one you're using. Plus, you can define your own fields for it to use and customize the schema. So if you create a different field type, you can use it.
And it builds all of this off of that initial, there it is. So simple fields form. And as I was learning today, as I was digging into hacking a little bit of this, so simple fields form wraps simple fields, and then everything inside simple fields is light DOM. So
yes, so you can style it, darn it.
So you can style it, but, and we need to, I think this might be a good example, Nikki, where we should break the shadow root on simple fields form, because then the accessibility tree stuff gets a lot more simplified, is my understanding. So there's an issue with accessibility and form inputs and tabbing into shadow roots and things like that. But one way around that is, you know, we're leveraging data in this nice compartmentalized way, but then Nikki's injecting a really complex form, right? There's the tabs have a tab in them. A tab has a field in it, and a field has other field that, you know, it has labels and inputs and all that other fun stuff. But she's doing that in such a way that we're just passing in data and we're spitting out this really complex yet highly accessible and usable form structure.
Very, very nice.
So some other things I like about.
And just when I think I'm done, he gave me a list today of more stuff to do with it because he wants me to not sleep.
I want you to fully replicate Drupal's form API.
That's what I was told today. Yeah, just go
doing.
ahead and replicate Drupal, Nikki, if you could.
You're almost there.
In your spare time.
You're nearly there with it.
Have you experimented with server-side rendering at all?
Reporting structure here that's giving you too much work on this COVID time off.
I don't even report to him. He just like finds ways to get into my like obsessive tendencies so that I'm not able to let something go.
Aiden, what'd you say?
Is there any, have you considered server-side rendering for this?
Can someone give me a reason why I care to do so?
Building a form with JavaScript on the client side would destroy the form if someone had JavaScript turned off. The 0.0001% of users that do that. I want to say there has to be some sort of principled argument in there for you shouldn't have to generate a form HTML with client-side JavaScript from just like a weird philosophical sort of position. I don't think there's any real pragmatic argument in terms of usership against this approach, but
yeah, this is why we do a lot of light DOM, so that if the JavaScript is turned off, like basic form functionality would continue to work. So in the work that we're doing, we don't actually have a full form component yet. That's like in the works. But the work that we're doing for it and the light DOM that we've got marked up is just really basic standard form markup and tags. And then that is considered the data. And we chatted with Justin Fagnani and a few folks from the Google side for Lit Element and Lit HTML about this, and they kind of agreed with like the approach that we're taking. The light DOM becomes your data, and then that influences what goes into the shadow DOM. So you basically get like a really simple form experience if you have JavaScript turned off, and you get a much more advanced form experience if it's turned on. So it basically just upgrades it.
Progressive enhancement, yeah.
And that's
awesome.
that's the way Nikki's rewritten a way that the video player can work. So a video player can also have a normal video tag and a normal track inside of it, and then it'll use that to progressive enhance. So, and
there's a simple fields container that's a progressive enhancement version that will take fields from it'll have slotted like DOM fields. So we have some of that there. We just don't have a server-side version of the full form piece.
Oh yeah, totally. I've not looked into server-side at all. But yeah.
The fields themselves. Oh, sorry. What I've tried to do is create sort of a scaffolded approach where you can give things, you can drop things into light DOM, and then the JavaScript will progressively enhance. And then in some cases, if there's no equivalent, it's, there's no equivalent for us at this point. But the Chartist library is another example of one of those things that I did, where I now have my implementation of the Chartist.js stuff. You basically drop a table into that component, it'll read the table and then add the chart. And the same with the awesome. Simple fields container. It'll do that, where you drop a field in and it'll add all the styling to make it look like the paper inputs.
Awesome.
Yeah, we do a little bit of server-side rendering in Elms as far as the content getting spit out, and in HAX CMS actually we'll server-side render some of the content. But I mean, we just put it in the page before the page renders, and then the page re-renders it basically for SEO purposes. But it's so much of a headache that for what we've been doing with it, I see literally no reason to do it personally.
That's good.
But I do understand why. I do understand the methodology Cassandra's taking with that, and that also makes sense for certain integration methods. So this is the card list, and the card list does some interesting things. For one, we see this singleton paradigm again. So when I modal stuff, and by modal stuff I mean we went to an element and I have a demo, and then I click this pop-up button and it magically is there. The way that's happening is I call for simple modal, which operates exactly like the simple toast thing does. And then I have view demo. And this is something I do on a pretty regular basis with passing data around. We'll call it being lazy. As far as state management. So I have a button there, right? And the button says pop-up demo. This is inside of a looping over array. So there's an array that we have here, and we've checked to make sure there is an array, because if there's no array, then we don't let you click the demo button, right? So if there's an array of potential demos, we loop through and then take the tag out of that and just print it into data-tag. And so the reason I do that, and what that looks like, is there we go. So you see there's MWC-button data-tag equals MD block. And then we have this click event, right? So when the user clicks it, it fires the view demo. And view demo just does a sanity check that we have a target and that we have a next element sibling, which implies the thing that's being demonstrated. Another cool thing with some of the, and I noticed Nikki was doing this with a couple, and I've started to break pieces of this up, right? Having less logic-based rendering in the template, but yet still calling a function that does all the heavy lifting. So in this case, it's passing this demo item as far as what needs rendered to this HAX element to node. Then in HAX element to node, and this is another little like performance fun thing we do, is I say, okay, well, verify it has schema, again, just sanity check, and then dynamically import code sample. So this having a, oops, that's a bad one. This little piece down here, there's literally no reason for me to render that or import the definition unless you're actually gonna bother to view it. It has dependencies, it has to do color coding, it has a nice little copy and paste button and whatnot, right? So just copy license element. So I can wait until the user has interacted with this, conditionally render this, and then conditionally import this code sample to do the display there. So this is just gonna, and this HAX element to node just returns HTML. But so this is gonna basically inject HTML here based
And part
on
of the reason I
demo
do
data
that,
changing.
yeah, so part of the reason I do that pattern as well is so that way if I start extending elements based on elements, I can swap out or customize parts of the template instead of either choosing to adopt all of the template or none of it. So some of the things that I meant to be extensible might reference different sub-templates, I guess is what you would call them, so that way I can re-render however I need without reinventing the wheel.
That is true, and it didn't occur to me that's why you're doing that. So I know you did that in Simple Fields tab to show what that is. Or Simple Fields, is it tab? Yeah, tab. So I did just
I do it
see,
throughout there because a lot of the fields, I wanted them to be able to inherit different behaviors to be able to easily extend beyond field types I've already thought of.
yeah, I just noticed you did this today, and it's like, I don't even think this way. So I'm really glad I get to learn from you doing it this way. So what's going on with this Simple Fields tab is it's implementing another element Nikki made called alley tabs. And what she's referring to with the overriding is she has a function called tab label that is defined in this case on Simple Fields tabs, but we're inheriting from alley tabs. So if I go to alley tabs, there is a function here called tab label. So she's effectively overriding this in the subclass, and then using the base class, which says, hey, if you have this tab label, then just here's the tab, present it the way you want. And so she can effectively use the exact same element for huge swaths of it while allowing a bit of flexibility to herself to say, well, just that piece of the template, when you're viewed in this context, render this way. Did you see this convention somewhere, Nick? I've never, I don't know if other people have done it that way.
I saw some inklings of it when I was looking. I can't remember if it was actually in a lit element tutorial or at some point when I was working on rich text editor, I realized I wanted to have a couple types of rich text editors. One was sort of like a really minimal text editor that just kind of floated with the item, and one was like the full-blown like old school CK editor, and one was one where the if you scrolled, the top was sticky. And the thing is, in order to pull that off, I didn't want to have to rewrite everything, and that's where I first learned that convention. And the more I've realized that I can extend shit and customize it and not have to redo my own work, I just did it. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, you always do, Nikki.
You know, the more I realize like how much of like the power of this is actually just extending on your own work and making it as object oriented as possible, the more I thought about templates as pieces of templates and what happens if you override that. So I've done that trick, I think, with the chartist and the LRN design chart. And I've done it in, like I said, in rich text editor and all of the fields in Simple Fields. I think Simple Fields field maybe is the one that does it extensively because there are different template parts based on whether or not you're doing, you know, a field set of checkboxes versus a single element or whatever. So yeah, that's basically why I'm doing it.
So I'm wondering, like, we should just do that for everything then. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
What would be the argument for putting everything in the render function? Because you're locking it at that point, unless you override the whole render function.
Then yeah, you override the whole render function. I think I don't know if Nikki does that or if I've done that with a couple where I have like, here's the default way to do this, and then certain things will inherit all of its functionality. Actually, maybe that's what happens in HAX CMS with the sub-theming, is that I provide a base one that's just like, hey, render the slot, and then everything else that comes after it that inherits from it is effectively blowing that away. But yeah, for chunking purposes, that would make a lot of sense if we had like an area within that element that's more or less a card, quote unquote. Now you could start to say, well, shouldn't you just make other elements?
Well, so I've done it where I've extended the HAX TMS base element for something like learn to theme, and I just wanted to remove one element in the render function. So I just did a regex replace because I'm thinking rather than me copying and pasting all this and now it's locked in, and if I update, then I'm not going to get those new additions.
Yeah,
I'll
where
just do
if in your base one you just made that a separate function and
Right.
you overrode it. Yeah, and sometimes the argument might be, well, maybe those pieces should be elements on their own, but like a tab in like the actual tab part of a tabs interface isn't going to be its own little component necessarily. It's just like a part of a template. It doesn't have its own like functionality.
It's similar to how the iron list used to be. With iron list, didn't you specify the HTML structure in the shadow DOM, right? Or in the
light DOM for
in the light DOM.
In each individual one. Yeah, that's how an iron list operates. So there's a template, and then this is gonna paste. Well, sorry, I think maybe you're thinking iron pages, because iron list.
No, this is it.
Oh, okay.
So iron list is saying I'm just going to my render function is going to be whatever is in between these template tags.
Yeah, so that's going to be in the DOM, which that's an interesting transition to the lit virtualizer. So this is kind of the successor to iron list. It has both lit HTML and lit element based ways of integrating it, and I messed around with it. I ended up not using it for this little project, but what's interesting is it has that. It's kind of both. It's got both. So the way that you implement it is you import scroll from lit virtualizer. You tee up an array of whatever it is you're rendering. Then you provide the function to pass it through. And so you know it's going to run through this and print it per number of times it finds that. And then when you want to throw it into a template, you just have this HTML, and then it's, okay, well, scroll, and here's the items to scroll by and the thing to render for each of them. So with the way that that gets integrated then in like a lit, they have a lit element example as well. Where is that? There it is. So you could do a lit virtualizer, right? And it has your posts that are passed in, and it has the callback for rendering. You could have that in a subclass and then go up to the next level, completely rewrite the way it renders, but yet the item assembly is the same and it's tied into state management and stuff.
Yeah, I really wonder, I like both of those patterns. Like they're two, so having them in the functions that you can override by extending the web component, or if you're the end user using them, I really like the idea of being able to define your own template and using the template tags. So that way, like if Cindy wants to use one of our elements, she can just alter the HTML right inside of the HTML.
Yeah, that's becoming a little more difficult. Well, I shouldn't say difficult, but I just haven't seen anyone do that. That is a good idea. As far as these Polymer-esque conventions, I haven't seen people really translate to lit element in the same way. But yeah, you could just have template literal syntax inside a template tag, I guess, and then process it after loading it in. Yeah. Another thing I found in this journey down the rabbit hole here, as far as like something to do with lit HTML, is I have an object, and then I wanted to print out the items in the object. So I use object.keys, which will return an array, and then I do a map, which will then give me the item in question, which was a little weird. I've never done that before. It was accounting for the data structure that is this gizmo.meta thing.
That's one of my other all-time favorites.
And then what you end up visually getting with that is in the details, because people are allowed to define what's in the metadata area. And so if they defined author or owner or whatever else, right? That one doesn't have owner, this one has author. Some of them have, looking for one that has nothing. There are ones that don't have anything. If those don't exist, then they just don't get rendered. But those keys are completely variable. So people can put in whatever the heck they want and it'll get printed regardless. Again, I wrap that in a conditional render, so then it won't print those list items in this case if they don't exist, knowing that tag name is going to be there and hey, here's how you could use this as a developer is going to be there. So one of the other things is if you manipulate object or array data directly or deep within an object, sometimes you do have to just call this.requestUpdate, and this is a lit element convention that basically says forcibly reset the data and update everything. Ideally, if you just updated individual items, so the way that mapping happens is enabled and list will be more difficult for lit element to nicely notice have changed. However, columns is a number, and so anytime columns changes, it's going to very easily be able to target that and iterate over. I'm trying to see where I even have that. Oh, I have this get calls function. Okay. So get calls is going to run through. This is another nice conventional thing that lit element is giving you is, so when you define the properties block, in this case calls, then every time there's a noticed change to that property or attribute, it's going to run this update function, and you're going to have a change record that's going to be the previous value and then what was currently changed and what this is changing to. So in this case, anytime someone updates calls, which is what I do in that form, I set the attribute on HAX element card list, which I believe is calls 3. There we go. So in the template above this, right, it sets calls. So I'm passing that value down into here. And then that element, whenever calls changes, it loops through and says, oh, well, what type of layout should we pick? So when you pick 3 columns, it updates this layout variable. Layout variable is defined here, it's a string, but then I actually write it into the grid plate element that Nikki made, and that's how it's able to lay that stuff out appropriately. So to the when the pros and cons of lit element, I think would be a good time to talk about that. The reactivity of data is the #1 reason I use lit element.
I don't know when I've had to, with lit element, actually force a re-render.
It's only, I nearly guarantee you're going to have to as you build out the studio, Nikki, because you're going to have like a list of posts, right? And then you're going to let a student click and hit edit and make changes to one of their posts. And you're going to know like, hey, post 13 updated, but you're not going to know that like post 13, 5 fields down into this object updated.
Yeah, basically what I'm saying is that for the most part, I have found that the updating has been very nice.
Yeah, and that actually, to fake the updating, a lot of times you'll see us use spread operators. So this convention, and this is a spread operator, basically says, well, this is an array of a list, and it fakes a new array out of the items currently in the array. That is enough to trigger lit element to notice that HAX data has changed and run this. So there are certainly some little...
And that might be also why I don't notice it as much, because I tend to use
that.
Yeah. The other thing is I really like leveraging first updated, so that, you know, say there are certain things that you don't want happening until the initial set of properties are applied. After the element's been defined with its properties, but that, you know, the first set of properties are applied to the element, there are certain things that maybe that's when you want to do them. And
yeah,
so I use that a lot.
The life cycle, and so that's the life cycles piece. So vanilla JavaScript is going to give you a constructor and then connected callback and disconnected callback, which is the element is attached and then the element is removed effectively. Lit element asynchronously self-renders. And so if you wanted to write this dot shadow root dot query selector, you know, like ID button, you can't actually do that safely in a connected callback, because you don't know if, even though the tag is attached to the page, you don't know if the guts of the tag are rendered. And so they provide this lifecycle hook, which is first updated, which implies that it's right after that async promise has fulfilled. And so now you know there's a shadow root there, for example. It's part of how it's able to cheat on performance so heavily with standing things up.
That's really good to know, because like we've been doing that manually with promises ourselves, but it's nice to know that's built into Lit. So that's a good item to put on our like pro con list.
Oh yeah, that is definitely on the pro list.
The other major aspects that Lit element is giving you comes in the static get properties. So, and I'm mostly just looking, okay, good. Of course you used one. So you define the property and then you have to say what the type is. This is a little annoying in my opinion. This was a Polymer thing and they took it out. If this is named icon expanded, in the DOM, if you wanted to set that value, you would actually have to type icon expanded, but lowercase. And so they were just like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what you name that, it's just this. And I don't think that way when I see a camel case. So you can say attribute, and this is gonna say, oh, okay, well, when this attribute changes, map it to this property. The other thing that they provide, so they are doing the property to attribute mapping on the fly. That's another big one as far as reasons to why to use it. If you do a lot of, again, data reactivity type of stuff. And then the reflect, I think, is a big one for us personally. So if you say reflect, that is then going to make this, it's going to reflect the property to an attribute, which the property is the data definition. If this means nothing to, I know some people on this, it probably means nothing to, but the attribute is just like a textual representation of the value, whereas the property is a full-blown like, oh, I'm a Boolean, I'm true or false. But the Boolean property, if you translate that to an attribute, is going to have to just be a string that is the actual thing, right? So in this case, expanded. So what saying reflect true nets you is that then you can do CSS selectors in your style sheet like this. So effectively, whenever the state changes and expanded flips its value and it's true now, then this CSS is going to match. I know Nikki and I use that a ton. And you can't, like, these are things you can do in vanilla JavaScript for sure. And I don't know, do you have any of these type of conventions, Cassandra? It's been a while since I looked at what used to be called Relevant.
Yeah, we do. We use some like Sass magic to abstract some of this, so it's a little easier. In fact, we just refactored a little bit after chatting with Potter, actually, I think a meeting or two before, about the empty local variables. We refactored one of our functions so that it always prints an empty local variable, and then the theme variable, and then the fallback value. So it's really similar to kind of like what y'all are doing.
Nice. I'd say the other one is, and I think we talked about this on Twitter the one day, was the constructible style sheets aspect.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence about that.
So, so the lit element has some magic sauce that goes on in this styles callback, as well as this CSS function, in which it will assemble all of the style sheets. And then if the platform supports what are called constructible style sheets, it'll leverage those, which basically allow you to pass a global style definition around, but yet in memory, it's only held as one value. This is like the most far we've ever been in the weeds on anything. But fortunately, there's someone working on the CSS spec on the call. So it makes sense that this would even come up.
Yeah, I've used it not just to grab the super styles, the styles from the thing that I might be extending, but maybe I don't want to necessarily extend, but just borrow a style sheet from somewhere else. I can import, I could do an import statement for some other element and then grab its styles that way too. So without even extending that element.
And this is our most
really
common. This is our most common use of this. So, like Nikki said, extending from super styles. So we've got simple colors is an element she made. So that's our base class, which if we look at simple colors is a giant superclass so that we could just pull in the CSS variables if we really wanted to, or if we ever needed to get off lit element. And then we extend lit element by wrapping in our superclass and create this thing called simple colors. So simple colors is an element that no one's going to use. It doesn't do anything by itself really. But then when we're in HAX body, for example, or we're in HAX CMS's theme layer, or we're in just some search appliance, this super.styles in memory, even though, I mean, you can see on the side, we leverage that technique even by simple search here 36 times, which those are all simple colors probably. Even if there's 36 times that shows up, we're only referencing in memory one copy of simple colors.
Yeah, and that's what allows us, oh, sorry. That way, if anything is extending simple colors, it's getting the accent color and the dark properties. And so, by allowing us to attach that to that, it's it's allowing us to set theming at the element level, which is how Brian's able to do the things where each element has a different color because our theme is actually element specific.
So as far as cons, I mean, trust me, I had a whole bunch of cons associated with Polymer elements. I really haven't had any with lit element. It's very small overall. I mean, forget what it is, like 4K or something. I think Joe Moore from who used to be at BYU, wish we could get it. We need to see if we can get him on here sometime. But he said by the time he ended up rolling out about 20 or 30 elements that they worked on, he replicated so many conventions over and over again that it's almost like he made a lightweight lit element anyway. So I don't know that I really have I could see just doing like lit HTML, but it's really hard to justify in my mind not using lit HTML once you get into all this data reactivity piece. So I don't know, do you have any like pro cons you're specifically arguing about internally, or?
I think right now our biggest pro con is like pro, obviously the being able to responsively refresh just the parts that you're updating, and the data binding is really nice for applications. But a lot of our use cases brochureware. And so like you're building for HAX, which is very responsive, very dynamic. We're building for mostly static pages that don't have a lot of dynamic content. We have a little bit of like, maybe analytics will inject some dynamic content, and we're working towards situations where we might need more data binding as we try to respond to like logged in users, for example, and to serve them up the correct content. But as of right now, it's just brochureware. So we're kind of at the point where we're like, well, is it too heavy for what we're doing so far? But as things get more complicated, something like this becomes more helpful. And we certainly are concerned about the developer experience. So we've been trying really hard to keep things very vanilla JavaScript. And that was kind of our initial approach, like just keep it as close to the spec as we could. But some of these, tools are really nice and makes the developer experience a lot simpler. So that could be worth it.
Yeah, I think the conventions it has that are specific to it are minimal. So I was definitely concerned, even like when we went in with Polymer, that was like, crap, some of the stuff we're writing is not valid. It's just like polymerisms. And so at least, you know, writing template literal syntax, like that works in other places. So that has me less concerned. I really have a hard time saying that there would be a reason not to use like lit HTML, even just for it has SVG processing capabilities as well, which we haven't even had to get into yet, but you can do, you know, there's an SVG import or CSS or HTML. And you can use those agnostic. I mean, in lit element, when I pull those in, it's just using the lit HTML ones. So I've been very happy with it. You can break it defaults to shadow roots, but you can break the shadow root with a single function call. It's create render root. And so if you just did return this, that breaks the shadow root. So then you're working entirely in light DOM with the element. There's some nice little helper mix-ins for lit HTML, or sorry, for lit element that add back in some of the polymerisms that we took out, like observables and things. But
Class
overall,
map is a big one.
Class map, what's that?
It takes an object and spreads its properties out as classes. So if they're Boolean, so it includes them if they're true. We said a lot.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else in lit element that really, I mean, I love the DI, like we've been able to have students start picking this up and using it that definitely wouldn't be able to use vanilla at first. So it's a good stepping stone.
I used it when I was doing the workshop for the Hyatt Web Academy, because it was an easy way to try to teach somebody all of this within an hour and a half's time, because it's readable and easy to pick up on. But, you know, part of that is our use case and our context.
I found it just lit element and lit HTML are just much more declarative. It's just the easiest way that I can describe it. Beyond any of the technical depth of why, it's just much easier to. The readability comes from how it's declarative and not imperative. Vanilla is still pretty imperative to me.
So, but what about the users who are not as comfortable with JavaScript? Have you guys had any issues with them interacting with the template? Like if you had someone, for example, like we have users who are just like front-end developers who just do styles and semantic markup, and that's their expertise 100%. If we want them to contribute to the project, do you foresee any issues with them? Because like the template has to be in the JavaScript. We have a hard time, like we tried to pull out the template into like a separate HTML file, but there's so much more intermingling when you use lit element between the attributes and how they're declared and like calling the functions that they actually are supposed to connect with in the template versus doing it in the JavaScript. So there's a lot more, I find, like JavaScript logic in the template than just markup. And so one of the concerns we had was like, can someone who's just an HTML developer understand and grep what's going on in the file without a JavaScript understanding?
Yeah, and a lot of our elements start with that because of, you know, patterning off of what you all pioneered. We have a lot of elements that do that, split things out as far as their SRC. I'm trying to find one. There we go. As far as their source into separate pieces. I know that helped, Chuck's not on this call, but I know that helped him a lot early on with getting more comfortable with it. Andrew, I mean, you'd be the best use case for this as far as like experience, because I know you're new to doing front end web in this way, and we just pieced through that lit element stuff the other day.
Yeah, I mean, the initial usage of the HTML, the CSS, and whatnot was definitely. I found it easy to follow. I'm not a great JavaScript developer. So like, I mean, it's something that I'm trying to develop, but you know, I'm not magic at it by any sense of the imagination. So, you know, having those constructs, it helped me to kind of see how things were put in place. But at the same time, you know, we've broken out from it as well. So, you know, we're not using all of that aspect. So that, I don't know, I have a hard time seeing, even with the idea of you know, a really super simple site that's a, you know, a brochure where, you know, as Cassandra's talking about, like the idea of a site without JavaScript is a hard concept for me at this point. I don't know what you're going to develop on the web at this point without having some sort of interactivity.
I mean, I'll clarify, like, I don't mean there's no interactivity in brochureware. Brochureware certainly has interactions, but we're not doing data binding. So like, we're not constantly going to a database and updating and refreshing content in specific areas where, for the most part, the data is coming from the CMS and we know the structure and it's not changing as the user interacts with the page. So as the user interacts with the page, you might have interactions, like you know, scroll down to a particular section or you activate a tab, but that tab is not then like going and fetching data from the database very often. So we have very few pages that are really like app based, that are really dynamic and that are really pulling in data on the fly like that. They're mostly static content.
I'm wondering if, so moving from Polymer to Lit, Chuck, my coworker, had the most difficulties with mapping over a list of items. Polymer is just very, you could do everything in the using div tags or HTML tags. So I'm wondering if for those higher order components that have to iterate over lists, you make those not have any HTML in them and break those out into their own elements that then you can send the front end people into and say, okay, this is an item tag. You know, the only thing that's going to be in there is property binding, but that's more approachable. Like doing the $sign bracket and then property name, that's more approachable than, okay, do a you know, this.items.map question mark. That is a little hard.
I like that idea of like abstracting some of that logic into the JavaScript and then just leaving a really simple placeholder in the template.
Well, we can use my learning as a
Cindy will be a great guinea pig.
Because yeah, I get all the front end stuff. I cannot write JavaScript. I can find JavaScript. I can make JavaScript work for what I need it to do. But yeah, sorry folks, I had to go full on dark because the migraine has hit.
So I think that might also be a good use for those little sub templates that we were showing that I was doing, because you could do sort of a combination of what Potter said, where you could define the parts as little HTML pieces and then pull them back in.
Mm-hmm. And having, I think boilerplating helps a lot too. So a lot of our tooling will stamp out a boilerplate that even has just commented out functions of all the other stuff. And I know that helped a lot with the transition step. Or even just structuring the element and telling people like, look, the things that this references are all at the top. And then the first thing you're going to see in here is going to say HTML. And then it's going to look like HTML if you have so like the right VS Code plugins, I think helps dramatically. Like there's a lit-HTML one that'll visualize CSS and HTML correctly. Once the custom elements.json standard like stabilizes more, I'm starting to have elements. I don't know if it's VS Code is starting to pick it up or what, but like I'm starting to have elements that are offering autocomplete suggestions for attribute names when I'm not in their template. Now that's what custom-elements.json is supposed to provide, but I've never noticed that outside of the last week. So I don't know if I fix something in our tooling for those, but yeah, so we are at times. So again, this is week 5 now. Holy mackerel, we're doing this quite consistently. Thank you all for joining us. You can check out, we should post these episodes to hacks.camp for sure, but they're on the ElmsLN YouTube channel. We'll send out links afterwards. Thank you all for attending. Good conversation.